Hi, welcome back, everyone. We are in the afternoon session of the Faculty Research Symposium, and we have some really good, amazing presentations to do today. But as a custom, we pray at Oakwood to welcome God into every event that we do. So let's bow your heads for prayer to open this afternoon session. Dear Lord, I just thank you for allowing us to be here today and to learn more information about some things that can help our society as well as ourselves. I pray that it may be with the presenters, that they may present the information in a well manner that individuals be able to understand. And please be with all the attendees that they may understand the information. Thank you once again for your blessings. We love you and we praise you. Amen. All right, so I am Dr. Elaine Vanterpool, the chair of the Faculty Research Symposium. I'm also the chair of the Department of Biological Sciences, and I will be serving as the moderator today for this section. And the first person that I want to introduce who will be presenting is Professor Donnette Chambers. She serves as an assistant professor and the Public Relations Program Coordinator in the Department of Communication at Oakwood University. Professor Chambers is an alumna of Oakwood University's Communication Department with a Bachelor's of Arts in Communication with a concentration in Public Relations and a minor in Sociology. She is also a graduate of Roosevelt University in Chicago with a Master of Science degree in Integrated Marketing Communications. As the program coordinator of the Public Relations program, she is responsible for preparing students to receive every opportunity to learn and develop the necessary skills to be excellent communication professionals. Donnette has chosen to dedicate her life to all things communication. She is an avid storyteller and enjoys creating and fostering the dreams of others, setting the stage for their success. Recently, Professor Chambers chartered the Public Relations Student Society of American chapter of Oakwood University. Oakwood is the second historically Black university to have the designation in Alabama and the 20th out of 375 colleges and university. She serves on the board of directors for both the North Alabama Public Relations Council of Alabama chapter and Public Relations Society of American Alabama chapter. Professor Chambers' research interests take an impactful look into the strategic communication and its bearing on organizational culture and stakeholder engagement, strategic messaging, and branding. Donnette thrives off of a community and loves providing opportunities for her students to grow professionally and her family and friends to grow holistically. When not singing, cooking, or planning, Donnette spends her time learning the joys of being marked by God's rest. And I will turn it over to Professor Donnette Chambers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vanterpool. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I want you guys to learn a little bit about me for a second. So as we look at will the clear identity please stand up, I want to let you know a little bit about my love languages. I'm a words of affirmation person. So, well, primarily. So that means that words mean things for me. So if you tell me that my hair looks good or that I've done something well, then that makes me happy, right? I feel loved in that way. And if you have told me that, and then if you see that I am stressed or overwhelmed and you see, and then you bring me a sandwich or you decide to put gas in my car or, I don't know, take the trash out if we're in a relationship or anything like that, then listen, my heart smiles. So what does that mean? That means for me, how does that work in tandem, right? That means that words and actions, like they need to follow each other. And I don't think that I'm alone in that. I think that for all of us, words need to follow actions. And I think that every person or every organization needs to have that mindset when they think about being in relationship with anyone. And that's what public relations and strategic communication is all about. Mutually building and maintaining mutually beneficial relationships with between an organization and their publics, right? So let's see how that conversation lends itself to institutions. So according to the National Center for Educational Statistics and their 2017 data, there are 1,687 private nonprofit institutions, okay? And all of these institutions are vying for the same thing. They're vying for students and faculty members. They're vying for staff. They're vying for funding. And all of that is important. And they spend a lot of resources making sure that they have a strategic plan. So goals and objectives, making sure that they are a viable institution. And so my research has been focused on making sure that the efficacy of those institutions, identity is as detailed in those plans, is accompanied and really bolstered and communicated by a strategic communication plan. And so I want to posit for your consideration that an institution's identity is not sound or productive until stakeholders engage positively, proselytize willingly, and personify with integrity its strategic message and motto. And so what is communication theory? So strategic communication is purposeful communication, the use of communication by an organization to fulfill its mission. And I mean, that's great to know that the components of this theory include public relations. It includes things that you are probably familiar with or not, but community involvement, issues management, branding, key term, public affairs, investor relations, internal communication. And so all of these things matter in strategically communicating with an organization. And so it's great to have a strategic plan. You need one to operate an institution, so specifically an institution of higher education, but without effectively communicating that strategic plan, your institution identity is lost on the people that need to embody that institution and that institutional identity. And that's what public relations and strategic communication is there for. Okay, so a lot of the rationale for strategic communication, why does it exist? Well, it's the unifying framework to analyze communications by an organization. And it is a fundamental goal of communication by organizations. And so what comprises institutional identity? Well, Ledoux in 2005 narrowed down the concept to a mission statement, a slogan, a logo, or a statement of defining purpose. And usually institutions can say, well, like, I've checked that mark. I have this. And I have a strategic plan that encompasses a mission statement. I have a slogan, I have a logo. So in a strategic plan is the process of documenting and establishing a direction for your organization by assessing both where you are and where you intend to go. And it gives you a place to record your mission and vision and values and long-term goals and the steps that you will take to reach them. So like all of this, you can say as an institution that you definitely have, or most institutions that have been recorded as having this do have, but not a lot has been documented on the motto. So, but before we go to there, let's talk about the mission, vision specifically. So a mission, it is a brief and clearly articulated statement. It is of what an institution is or organization is and its intended purpose. Okay, who are you? What are you here for? And it's supposed to be for the intent of supporting a company's culture. Okay, and then you have a vision, which is a declarative statement. Excuse me, that conveys where you plan on going. Or who you want to be. So it's like, I aspire to be this. And this is for all of my future thinkers out there. This is what we are saying, that if we achieve our dreams as an institution, we will no longer have to exist because we will have actualized this. Okay, that is a vision. And you don't have to be an institution to do this. You can be an individual, but let's stick with the theme today. And so institutions do this well, or sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Have a mission and a vision. They even have a core set of values, but a motto is a word or phrase or sentence that expresses an attitude, an ideal, or a guiding principle associated with an organization to which it belongs. And this is what encapsulates who you are, right? And so a lot of institutions and a lot of research has been done on the efficacy of mission statements and vision statements. A lot of analysis on the value or how to, a lot of analysis has been done on vision statements and mission statements and the construction of them. But if a motto is supposed to encapsulate this just by a few words, if it's supposed to encapsulate your identity, and there's not been a lot focused on simply stating in just a few words or phrases on how to do that. I think that in the US specifically, I posit for your consideration that there is a lot of work that needs to be done, especially as it relates to making sure that how we do it, what we stand for as institutions the world over, what we make sure that we embody. And so that is what I am committed to focusing on. So let's look at strategic messaging and how it affects how we encapsulate this motto. Okay, so strategic messaging, it is a value-based framework that you make sure that you employ in all your interactions with your stakeholders. And when you think about strategic communication and it engages employees in knowing how your purpose and mission and values all fit together. There is a certain alignment and sense making that stakeholders need to have with all elements, and that needs to be communicated when you think about developing, or when institutions think about developing their strategic plans. And so we've talked about the components of a mission statement before, and we've talked about a mission statement and vision statements, but I did not talk about a slogan, and I did not talk about how it affects your internal stakeholders versus external stakeholders. So, and so a slogan is a memorable phrase that spearheads specific marketing campaigns. And so a lot of institutions, in their attempt to win over prospective parents and students, and to gain funding or support from their alumni, employ these memorable phrases for campaigns. But that's not the same as making sure that whoever your stakeholder is, that they are positively engaging with however you identify, which is laid out in whatever your mission statement is, whatever your vision statement is, as it is encapsulated in your motto. And so for internal stakeholders, your mission and vision statements define performance standards and drive strategy, but and they are structured for ethical behavior. For your external stakeholders, they serve as a tool for public relations to create bonds with customers. And they are a basis for streamlining communication and partnerships. And so this is all necessary for, So you might be wondering, like, who are your stakeholders? And so your stakeholders are, this is a theory that was introduced by Edward Freeman, and it's defined, and stakeholder theory is defined as a stakeholder as a group or individual who has an effect or is affected by the organization's success. So in an institution of higher education, that is parents, current students, prospective students, that is alumni, that is lobbyists in the government, that is community organizers, and that's vendors, that is the community at large, and the list goes on. Anyone who can be affected or is affected by the institution, and it extends to those who impact the organization's efforts. So as you are thinking, like, who could that be? And when you're thinking about developing, and in my work, and as I'm thinking about this, and as I've been studying and researching, I'm thinking about how are the institutions who have their identity down packed, how are they defining their stakeholders? How are they communicating to them? And what is their strategic communication plan like? And they probably implement, and most of them implement probably something like McGuire's hierarchy of outcomes. It is a 9-step. It is a 9-step pyramid in which that I've laid out for you here. Not in a pyramid form. I apologize for that. But first, you are tuning in. So tuning in means that you are potentially just exposed. Attending means that you have now paid attention. Liking these are just steps on the ladder to you being engaged, and this happens for this is a method that people implement or institutions implement for every one of their stakeholders. At what level do they want their target audiences to be, or their publics to be not just tuning in or attending or agreeing with their decisions or their goals or objectives or remembering them or acting on them. But the goal is not to just be tuning in or comprehending them or learning them. The goal is to move from tuning in to proselytizing. And I mean, this is a presentation at a religious organization. And so I'm not sure if you know what proselytizing means, but just so you are aware, proselytizing is not just so that stakeholders learn or agree, but they're encouraged to convert, right? So this is so that students aren't just attending the university, but they are converting other people to attend. Alumni haven't just come here, but they are converting other people who would have never considered, right, to come. This is employees who are just so determined because of how they embody how they feel or how they are engaged, because of the communication aspects, how they've bought in to all of the things that are communicated at the institution. Like they've bought in so heavily, they've bought in so heavily to the motto, to the identity of the institution, not just the mission, not to just the vision, but what the embodiment of the institution is. They've bought into how it's been communicated to them. So much so that they are converting people at such a rate that that's what proselytizing is. And so I want to make sure that there's enough time for people to ask questions. If there are any questions in the chat, but an aspect of, for the institutions that we looked at how they are measuring. Sorry. So yes. So we looked at organizational culture and how organizational culture is not just. So yes, it is an aspect of what it means to function at that organization, but also commitment, and then how that commitment leads to how employees behave at the institution, and then how that leads to not only employees behaving, but what does that look like for students or alumni and other individuals. And our next, for the institutions that we looked at their strategic plans and how communication was evident or not evident, and then how that played into the elements of the communication that we could see, right, externally. Because not all internal communication is seen. And so our next steps would be stakeholder surveys, a qualitative study, and then a framework for developing a strategic communication plan for institutions to follow so that they can embody institutional identity positively. If anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Hi, that was actually very good. I learned so much interesting about institutional identity. I see some positive affirmation in the chat about your presentation being awesome. But I just have a question. It's just more of a curiosity question. So I know that institutional identity, they have their motto, they have their vision. But I just wanted to just get your opinion. Do you think that maybe the different challenges that private institutions versus public institutions or HBCUs, like those challenges, do you see that impacting maybe the motto or the vision of the school? I just want you just to explain maybe what you think HBCUs versus non-HBCUs or private versus public schools. You know, what do you see identity and challenges? How do you see them relating to each other?
I think that an aspect of that would be that institutions, so HBCUs have to know what they stand for, or like what are integral parts that make them, right? So I believe that it's asking each stakeholder honestly, like why they're there, like what makes them, and that feeding into why they attend, and that possibly leading to helping bolster why future people can attend. So that's one of the reasons for private versus public in my research that I've found. But a lot of yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and there was one question that came in the chat. Were the institutions HBCUs? And then after you answer that, then I have one more question to ask.
So yes, a couple of them were. So we looked at both HBCUs. We looked at HBCUs, some Adventist institutions, and private and public institutions.
Awesome. So, I'm glad to hear that mix. Now, the question that I see coming in, this is a good question. If you could develop a slogan for Oakwood University, what would it be?
Oh.
Put you on the spot.
They did. I do not know. And the reason why is because I haven't done that research, right? So as a PR professional or practitioner, I don't want to come up with a slogan that I haven't researched, like what would actually be a good fit for the institution, right? So I want to know first before I just assume.
You sound just like a researcher.
Listen.
Congratulations. I really enjoyed it. And that was very, very relevant information. I'm looking forward maybe next year to seeing the data and the results. I'm excited.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I plan on coming back. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, that was awesome. Now we're going to move on to our next presenter, Dr. Roman Lesnov. He's an associate professor of English at Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama. He teaches linguistics, in English as a second language, and freshman composition. He holds a PhD in applied linguistics from Northern Arizona University and has several years of experience teaching English and linguistics in the US and Russia. His research interests include second language listening, assessment, and research methods for applied linguistics. And I would like to introduce Dr. Roman Lesnov.
Hello, thank you. Thank you. It's 2:55. Do I still have 20 minutes or do I have less than 20 minutes?
No, you can have the full amount of time that you need.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. With you. Okay, perfect. Can you see me changing slides or not really? Okay, I hope you can see my presentation. So good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be participating in the 9th Research Symposium at Oakwood University as a presenter. Today, I'm going to talk with you about the role of visuals in second language academic listening tests. I conducted a systematic review of scholarly literature pertaining to this topic. And so I'm about to tell you how I conducted the review and to share the findings with you. So let me start with some background information about the role of visuals in second language listening tests. So first off, it seems that scholars now agree that when we listen to something, we get to process not only the verbal signal, but also the immediately available visual information like nonverbal cues in the form of gestures or facial expressions, like situational cues in the form of images showing the setting of a listening event, and also content-related cues as well, such as graphs, PowerPoint slides during an academic lecture, for instance. It goes without saying that academic listening situations in real life, we can think of lectures, office hours, study groups, seminars, or professional development conferences like this symposium. These types of academic listening events are normally visually rich, meaning that they often include content-related visuals in one form or another, and oftentimes in the form of presentation slides. The second point here says that visuals also play a role in how difficult it is to understand what is being said. Generally speaking, when visuals are present, it may be easier for us to comprehend what is being said. So considering these 2 points, if an academic listening test fails to incorporate any visual information, the construct of such a test will likely be what is called underrepresented, because it wouldn't have visuals that are normally present in authentic contexts. Also, the lack of visuals may negatively impact test takers' comprehension and make the test unfair. It is interesting that many second language tests on the market are still sound only, with very little visual information. The logos on this slide, for example, show the tests that are commonly used to accept international students to programs at American universities. You may have heard about some of them, like TOEFL, which stands for the Test of English as a Foreign Language. As far as I know, Oakwood normally requires international students to get a certain score on TOEFL for admittance to the university. However, these tests are still reluctant to include any visual information except for maybe 1 or 2 still images, like the one on the next slide. Here's a typical image that test takers would see while listening to a conversation between a professor and a student during the professor's office hours. So test takers would listen to a conversation and then answer the comprehension questions, like multiple choice questions. And they would see only this kind of image. This still image is better than nothing, of course, right? But it is not a good reflection of what happens in real life. In real life university lectures, in real life university contexts, we see way more than just a still picture. In authentic situations, we can see the objects around us moving in constant motion. We can see visual images in sequence. So it's more like a video or a movie. So from the perspective of test authenticity and test fairness, it would make much more sense to have a video accompany the audio signal in a test. Many studies have tried to justify the inclusion of video in second language listening tests. And there are many ways for researchers to obtain such evidence, to obtain evidence that video should be part of the listening test. One of which is conducting a comparison study. A comparison study would compare test takers' performance in two modalities. It would compare test takers' performance on a sound-only or an audio-only listening test with their performance on the same test, but in the audio-video modality. So one group of second language learners takes an audio-only test, and the other group of learners takes the video-based version of the same test. If the video-based version yields higher scores, we are poised to make a conclusion that videos should be incorporated in the test. This is exactly what a number of studies have done. Unfortunately, though, the findings of these studies are inconclusive and mixed. Some studies found a positive effect of visuals on test performance. Others found a zero or a negative effect. So these conflicting findings can be perhaps attributed to factors like different types of visuals used in tests, meaning that different studies may have used different types of visuals. Also, proficiency levels of test takers in different studies may have been different, and the studies may have used different text types and test question types. So my systematic review looked into the role of these variables in the previous research. As it relates to the type of visuals, it is important for us to understand the distinction between content and context visuals before understanding the findings of my study. So you can see an example of a context visual on the left and an example of a content visual on the right. You can see that content visuals on the right, the visual that is on the right, so content visuals are more closely kind of related to the subject matter of a conversation or of a lecture, while context visuals simply show the setting of a listening event, the speakers and their relative positions and movements. So my study was guided by the following research question. How does the effect of visuals on second language academic listening test performance interact with the types of visuals, test takers' language proficiency, and test item types? Notice that my study was delimited to academic contexts. So it was not concerned with other types of listening, right? Like listening to a radio show or a casual conversation over the phone. To answer this research question, I conducted a systematic review of the existing comparative studies. This review includes 4 major steps. It included step number 1, development of criteria for selecting studies. Number 2, literature search. Number 3, development of a scheme for coding the selected studies. And number 4, analysis and synthesis. I will now go over these steps in more detail. In terms of the selection criteria, they were the following. A study was selected if it met all these criteria on this slide. So it was a quasi-experimental or quasi-experiment or an experiment. It was selected if it also was a scholarly study, if it was written in English, compared adult test takers' scores on audio versus video academic listening test, and it reported the reliability of the test, and the reliability was acceptable, like more than 0.60. And finally, it had descriptive statistics. If a study didn't meet one of these criteria, it was excluded from the review. Step number 2 took place in March 2021. So as part of this step, I searched for the studies using the EBSCO system that Oakwood University is subscribed to, and using other venues like Google Scholar or ResearchGate. The EBSCO databases included ERIC, Science Direct, Academic OneFile, American Psychological Association, Communication and Mass Media Complete, and others. As a result of this search, 8 studies were identified. They were published in the period of 2005 to 2015. So I read each study in its entirety, annotated it, and coded it using a pre-developed coding scheme. The coding scheme, you can see it on the slide, it included factors that had the potential to moderate the outcomes of each study. So the resulting coding scheme consisted of these factors: target language, sample size, you can see their explanation in the second column, type of visuals used in the test, type of test questions, test taker's second language proficiency. I also coded each study for the independent variables. So in other words, for the factors that the study investigated in terms of their effects on listening comprehension. And of course, the findings of the study and their interpretation by the author were also included. So here are some findings that relate to how the selected studies were conducted methodologically. So you can see that all of the 8 studies were about English as a second language learners. The sample sizes ranged from 27 people to 202. Test takers' proficiency ranged from lower to higher. 4 studies investigated the effects of context visuals, and the other 3 studies included content visuals as well. 1 study did not report any type of visuals. And finally, assessment instruments in most of the studies were multiple choice listening tests. The synthesis of the research methodology also revealed that the selected studies provided little numerical evidence for proficiency. Instead of supplying a score on a standardized test, they simply described test takers' proficiency in less specific and more vague terms. Many studies provided only a rough estimate of test takers' proficiency level, with only 1 study supplying numerical evidence, such as a score on a standardized test. Another issue, critical issue that was identified was that many studies failed to sufficiently describe the visual information included in the listening tests. With the exception of 1 study, the descriptions of visuals were often brief, somewhat generic, and which made it hard for scholars to properly evaluate and replicate the study. Only 2 out of 8 studies actually provided an illustration or a pictorial example or an image for the employed visuals in their tests. So the analysis of literature did not reveal any interaction between second language proficiency, test type, and effects of visuals. So to put it differently, the findings of the selected studies suggested that proficiency and item type did not play a role in how visuals impacted listening comprehension. As for the effects of visuals, the findings of the study were mixed, as expected, a combination of positive, negative, and neutral effects on academic listening comprehension. But synthesizing these effects by visual type draws a slightly clearer picture here, however. It seems that all the studies that were about context visuals showed either a negative or a zero effect of visuals on academic listening comprehension. So the authors attributed these effects to the lack of content cues in the videos and to the distracting potential of the videos. On the other hand, the studies that included both context and content visuals mostly demonstrated a facilitative effect on second language academic listening comprehension. According to the authors, this effect stemmed from test takers utilizing gestures and photographs and diagrams from videos that were helpful for answering test questions. So while some questions clearly remain, the trend is becoming clearer. Videos with content-related visuals tend to be more helpful for test takers' academic listening comprehension than videos with just context visuals. So now, what do these findings actually mean for the field? Well, in general, the fact that videos with a mix of content and context visuals helped test takers with their listening comprehension can be taken as preliminary evidence that content-related visual information is relevant to what the test is supposed to measure. So, second language academic listening tests without content-related visuals or without visuals at all would miss an important component of the listening skill, and as a result may end up being unfair to students, because the lack of visuals may automatically mean the higher difficulty of the test. So it is recommended that test developers gradually start including video-based passages in their tests, along with traditional audio-only stimuli. So if doing so would enable test takers to conduct large-scale research also with thousands of participants and publish more results and more methodologically robust studies. Also, and finally, the findings of this study show that future research into the effects of visuals on second language listening comprehension may need to be a little bit more methodologically more rigorous. It is critically important for future studies to provide sufficient detail as to the visual configurations of the video-based academic listening test stimulus, meaning what kind of visuals were used, when exactly, what did they illustrate, were they consistent with the audio. So my recommendation is that the specification of visual configurations in future studies go beyond simply stating the type of visuals used in the test stimulus. It would be nice if future studies listed all the content-related visuals used in the test, kind of in the form of a chart, which would ideally include a brief verbal description along with an image for each visual. This information could go into the appendix of an article, or if there is no room or limited space, it could go as a supplementary material posted to the journal's website. It would make a study more robust, more replicable, and it will give a deeper insight into the how and why of the video's impact on academic listening comprehension. This study had some limitations, of course. It didn't use any statistical analysis to compare the selected studies, simply because the studies were so different. So there was a lack of homogeneity between them, which is a prerequisite for a statistical test usually used for systematic reviews. I also didn't include dissertations or a master's thesis for practical reasons, because they are long and would take way more time that I could spend on this project in this time frame. But I will try to continue this line of research and include the dissertation and master's thesis as well. Here's the bibliography for my study. I have to kind of quickly go through this bibliography. If you do have any questions about any studies, just feel free to email me. And I would like to acknowledge Oakwood University's Division of Research and Faculty Development for financially supporting this study and for providing a myriad of useful resources like workshops and guidelines. And of course, I would like to thank our God for helping me on the way to this presentation. Thank you, and please send me an email if you happen to have any questions or if you want to chat about this study. You can see my email on this slide.
Thank you. That was actually very interesting. And, you know, teaching students that are ESL, I can see why that's a very relevant study to do. Just a really quick question. Have you applied any of what you found to your classroom? And if so, what did you find?
Yes. I have tried, based on this research, I was involved in a similar research beforehand, and I knew that videos would be helpful for students as part of my classes and as part of my class, as part of assessments in my classes. So what I tried to do in my classes is to have enough videos, and I'm trying to make sure that those videos are representative of the authentic university context. I also try to help students develop skills of interpreting visual information, interpreting gestures that Americans make usually, interpreting their those cultural gestural information, and also diagrams and graphs as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that did. And I will be trying to use some of those strategies in my class. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please email Dr. Lesnov, as he has said. And so I am going to turn it over now. I'm going to introduce the moderator for the next presenter, and the moderator is Dr. George Ashley. He's the professor of the social work department, and he will introduce the next speaker. You're mute, Dr. Ashley. Yeah, so unmute.
My apologies, folks. Our principal investigator is none other than Dr. Marcia Burton. Dr. Burton is a native of Atlanta, Georgia. She is a graduate of Oakwood University with a BA in political science and a minor in mathematics. Now, upon graduating from Oakwood University, she attended Valparaiso University School of Law, where she earned her Juris Doctor. Recently, Dr. Burton received her LLM in taxation from Villanova University School of Law. She worked in legal aid and corporate law before transitioning into her current role as pre-law program director and assistant professor at Oakwood University. Dr. Burton has conducted research in the areas of science and law. She is a certified professional legal researcher by LexisNexis. Her work has been published in both legal and educational journals and magazines across the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to present to you Dr. Burton. Dr. Burton, as she presents to you today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ashley, for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. I'm now going to share my screen. And today we're going to be talking about the benefits of studying with classical music for standardized tests. So over the past decade, there has been great debate as to whether listening to classical music while studying actually improves test scores. Many believe that listening to classical music can help improve your mood, but doesn't necessarily have an effect on your brain. So the whole purpose of my research project was to actually find out if classical music does actually have some type of benefit to it, specifically to students who are studying for standardized tests. The project actually examined research that evaluated the effects of classical music on the brain. And I also used data to validate whether listening to classical music is a tool that should be used more amongst our students to improve their standardized test scores. So just to give a little introduction, there have been ever-ending and debate as to whether listening to classical music actually improves a student's test scores. Many articles have been written and experiments have actually been performed. A lot of scholars actually debunk what this form of listening to classical music benefits actually come from, and that's the Mozart effect. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. But I do want to point out that background music has actually become increasingly prevalent in our society. It is so common that an individual may not even be aware that there is background music in their environment. And so when we talk about background music, we want to give it the definition that is any music that's played while the listener's attention is focused primarily on a task or activity other than listening to the music. The function of background music actually differs from individual, and it also depends on the activity that they're completing while they're listening to it. Therefore, when we talk about classical music and its benefits, and as we move into the cognitive thinking aspect of it, we have to understand that music can be an enhancement for some, and it can also be a distraction for others. I do want to point out that although there is no study that has concluded definitively that classical music affects the average student's test scores, my research has concluded that listening to classical music while studying does influence a student in a positive manner. It encourages cognitive thinking. It relieves test anxiety. It improves their mood, also affecting their study habits and thereby leading to better test performance. Before we break down more of this slide about cognitive thinking, I want to give a little background information on what is considered the Mozart effect. So the Mozart effect is one of the leading theories concerning classical music and its positive influence on a student's cognitive abilities. So the study was conducted in 1993, and it consisted of a group of college students. And basically, the theory that is proposed by the Mozart effect is that listening to music can increase spatial temporal reasoning. Spatial reasoning is the ability to understand the relation between objects. So, college students who participated in this study listened to a Mozart sonata before completing a task that measured their spatial abilities. The study found that students who listened to Mozart outperformed the students who did not while completing the same task. Therefore, the authors and the researchers concluded that there is a direct positive influence of listening specifically to Mozart sonatas on spatial abilities. So according to this theory, if students listen to classical music while studying, they should be able to increase their memory of the test materials. Now, what you might find interesting is how I keep stressing Mozart sonatas. This study was in relation to Mozart alone. They have done other studies and used other types of classical music, such as Beethoven, and they found that the music by Beethoven was actually less effective than Mozart. Which brings us to our slide. When we think about cognitive thinking, we have to understand that Mozart's music activates both the left and right brain simultaneously, which in turn maximizes learning abilities. Studies have shown that when students learn languages, they retain much more with Mozart playing in the background than those who study while listening to no music at all. As you all know, classical music can positively affect the student's creativity and ability to think abstractly. And this is how we see that left side of the brain and that right side of the brain both working at the same time. Music is an art form and is creative itself. And thus, when a person listens to classical music, it in turn activates a student's creative mind. In order for us to better understand this effect on cognitive thinking, we have to look at two different structural models, okay? And there are two very prominent working memory models published by Baddeley and Cohen. When we talk about Baddeley, his model from 1986 assumes that working memory is arranged in a hierarchical system. In his system, working memory is separated to long-term memory. Long-term memory, in turn, influences the working memory. Therefore, students can actually process new information easily when presented in different modalities. Thus, according to Baddeley, students can listen to background music and process information easily, while some students who don't have such a great working memory will have issues listening to background music because the presented auditory might actually overload other subsystems of processed information. So next we turn to the second working memory model, and that is of Cohen. And according to this working memory model, we have to take a different approach. We have to use the approach that's known as the embedded processes model. In this model, working memory is the activated part of long-term memory, and there is no differentiating between the processing of different modalities. So Cohen actually argues that the similarity of information being processed influences how much the information can be processed simultaneously. So under this theory, listening to instrumental music, such as classical music, would be less disruptive than music with lyrics. And that's because music with lyrics have the added verbal aspect. Cohen actually didn't agree with Baddeley in that background music still relies on the same cognitive capacity and therefore should hinder some students from learning. So both of these working models are very important when we're trying to understand how classical music affects cognitive thinking. While there is no actual empirical data or evidence of the interaction between background music and the working memory capacity for learning outcomes, this slide actually serves to determine which type of learner benefits more. Okay, and so before we go into that, I would like to look at some studies that actually tested out some of these cognitive thinking abilities in classical music. And so when we look at this graph, this is a graph from the study Classical Music, Education Learning, and Slow Wave Sleep, a targeted memory reactivation experiment. During this experiment, it was realized that bad sleep patterns cause college students to compromise their memory gathering process. The study got 50 undergraduate college students, and it got them to complete a college level microeconomics lecture while listening to classical music. After the students fell asleep, they replayed the classical songs. And then according to this study, the students who listened to classical music improved by 18.85% compared to those that did not. And this diagram shows as such. There is also another study that was done in relation to students as respective of this table. And this study was also conducted with undergraduate students. And they wanted to figure out what different effects the students were a part of when they listened to different types of music when they were trying to learn overall. And so the group comprised of 249 individuals, and they were divided in half, as one group being the control group and the other group being the experiments group, as designated on the graph in this slide. And then the students were given an hour-long video recorded lecture and then were supposed to take a multiple choice questionnaire based on it. The experimental group listened to classical music in the background during their lecture. And then the students were given another questionnaire to engage their emotions before and after the lecture. The experimental group scored significantly higher on the multiple choice quiz, with getting a higher score by 2.3 points. And also the positive effect decreased for the more control group lecture that did not have the classical music. Thus, when we think about cognitive thinking, some students can actually listen to background music and process information easily, while other students actually might have difficulties processing information. So you have to be sure to determine what type of learner you are. Learners with low working memory capacity will have a more difficult time studying with background music because they will not have the capacity needed to invest in the learning tasks. The opposite is for students with high working memory capacity. The next thing that I would like to point out about classical music and its benefits is the fact that it relieves test anxiety. It's essentially widely accepted within undergraduate education, and especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, that college students experience a very high level of anxiety. And this anxiety is associated with many different stressors, including academic demands, peer pressure, substance abuse, financial issues, and even them feeling homesick. It's even been showed in studies that minorities, with Oakwood University being an HBCU, are more prone to experience performance anxiety, particularly if a stereotype is negative about performance that's linked to these types of students. So for example, even though this is not true, it's been said many, many times that African Americans do not perform well on achievement tests. Thus, what the classical music does is it relieves that anxiety and stress that's associated with these negative stereotypes. It can serve as more of a relaxation tool, and it has a common effect on a person's mood, which leads to a positive impact, which in turn leads to better studying and ultimately better performance on standardized testing. So when we talk about this, we did a little more research and we found another study. And this study is coping with stress and the effectiveness of different types of music. So this study was done on 56 college students to gauge the relaxing effects of classical music and how it helped deal with stressors. The students were exposed to different genres of music after a stressful test. The results showed that listening to self-selected or classical music after something stressful actually significantly lowered their negative mental state compared to heavy metal or even just complete silence. And so we kind of see that this is very much so a trend. US Today even report that one study found that music's effects on anxiety levels is similar to actually getting a massage. And so we know that our college students, as they are prepping for the MCAT, the LSAT, the GRE, the DCAT, that they're typically studying during extremely stressful times. They are overwhelmed with homework assignments and tests already from their undergraduate classes. A lot of them might have jobs, they might have issues in their homes. And so classical music is scientifically proven to actually reduce this stress and relax those that listen to it. And then research conducted by the UMD Medical Center has found that listening to soothing music can decrease blood pressure, heart rate, and anxiety levels in heart racers. The next aspect of this is that classical music actually improves your mood. You're a lot happier when you listen to music. Research has shown that students are better at solving problems when they have a positive mood compared to those who have a negative or neutral mood. And so how does it improve your mood? So for all of my science colleagues, music increases your dopamine levels and releases pleasurable emotions. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter in our brain that promotes feelings of happiness and excitement. Music also lowers your cortisol levels. And then cortisol is a hormone that is associated with stress and anxiety. So lower cortisol levels are good, and students who have it are actually able to perform better on standardized tests. Classical music also helps you because for our students that are prepping for standardized tests, they need to have long study sessions. And so when you have the music playing in the background, you're in a good mood. That good mood then in turn leads to more motivation and focus that's needed for that long study session. Theories also indicate that by being in a positive mood, you have better memory formation. There was actually a study done in France, and it was published by the Learning Individual Differences. And it found that students who listened to a lecture while classical music was played in the background performed better on a quiz when compared to those who went through the lecture without music. Classical music also helps with your study habits, but you want to be particularly careful and you want to ask yourself 3 questions. First, you want to understand what your personality type is. Secondly, you want to be in consideration of the type of work that you're trying to complete. And lastly, you want to be in consideration of the music. And so when we talk about the personality type, it's very important to note that people who are more outgoing, more extroverted might enjoy the music better than introverts. And when we look at the students' working memory capacity, we see that when it's higher, there's more beneficial studying with classical music than when it's lower. We also have to look at the type of work the student is doing as one of the key factors. If the standardized test deals with a lot of reading comprehension, listening to classical music may actually have a detrimental effect. So students who are taking the LSAT, should actually proceed with caution when incorporating listening to music while studying, as this may have a more negative impact due to the nature of the exam. However, when it comes to standardized tests with more math and science elements, such as the MCAT and the DCAT, research has shown that it actually demonstrates no negative effect. In fact, classical music has been beneficial for the mind when learning, in particular, math and science. Finally, again, the type of music is very important when determining whether listening to music is a good study habit. And research has shown that classical music is one of the best forms of music to listen to while studying. There are pros and cons when listening to music while studying. However, after conducting this research, I honestly believe that the pros outweigh the cons. And I do believe that listening to classical music should be incorporated for our college students. So, in conclusion, listening to classical music should be encouraged in colleges. This is especially true for college students who do not test well or are preparing for standardized tests such as the GRE, the MCAT, and the LSAT. Some standardized tests actually require memorization of many facts across multiple subjects. And while others just require a mastery of analytical reasoning and test-taking skills. These exams can be extremely daunting. Our students are extremely nervous when they take these exams. The anxiety, the stress, and the mental toll weighs heavily on them. Classical music is an art form that can help. I recommend that every student give studying with classical music while preparing for your standardized test a try. Experiment with listening to it. Use classical music as that boost. Try out different classical music song selections and see which one works best for you. Research is still ongoing about classical music, and there has been no conclusive data on whether it is extremely beneficial or not. However, I actually implore all college students, especially those that are experiencing issues with standardized tests, to use classical music as a studying tool and reap its wonderful benefits. These are my references for the presentation. Thank you so much for your time and allowing me to present to you this wonderful information. And I hope that it is a tool that you will be able to share with your students across our university. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burton. That was an amazing presentation on the benefits of classical music. In fact, I've turned on the classical music myself right now, listening to it myself after listening to that presentation. And we learned today that it improves your mood, reduces anxiety. It's a motivation tool. It improves your memory and function. And I like that concept you talked about with the Mozart effect in terms of activating both the left and the right side of the brain. Really, really good information. Now we have time for one question, and I see one question here in our chat, and it's a very simple question, right? But it says, was there anything in your life, Dr. Burton, that stimulated your interest about this particular topic? In other words, why did you want to investigate this topic?
Thank you, Dr. Ashley, for that question. So I actually wanted to investigate this topic because I am a product of an HBCU, and specifically Oakwood University. And I know, along with myself as well as my classmates, we struggle with standardized tests, which is required for all graduate and professional programs. And I see even years later, now as a professor at Oakwood University, that same struggle amongst our students. And so I said, okay, there has to be something that I can share with our students to help them so they won't struggle how myself and my classmates struggle on these standardized tests. And that got me into researching, and that's when I came up with classical music. And I actually, Dr. Ashley, recently tested this theory out myself in preparing and studying for an exam. And I realized that when I had classical music in the background, I was able to study longer. I retained more information, and I was in a happier mood about what I had to do, the daunting task that I had to do. And so I began to want to find more research and present it to our students, because I want Oakwood University students, HBCU students, to not be a part of what society says, that, oh, you go to a HBCU, you won't perform high on standardized tests. But I want us to break the mold. I want us to break the stigma, and I want us to score very high on tests. And I want students to be able to use classical music as a tool to help them do so.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Burton. I will be using that concept with my students and myself. We appreciate this. That was a wonderful presentation, and something that can benefit everyone listening to this. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll turn it back to Dr. Vanderpool.
Thank you. I know I will be telling my biology students to make sure they listen to classical music as they do their MCAT or DAT or whatever standardized test they choose to take. Okay, that was very interesting. So now I'm going to introduce the moderator for the next section, which is Dr. Lisa James. She is the chair of the Department of Mathematics and Computer Science, and she will introduce her speakers.
Our next presenter is none other than Dr. Dorothy Ford. Dorothy Ford, PhD, RNC, NIC, and CNS, was a former University of San Diego student and the first recipient of the Win Cairns Dissertation Award from Western Institute of Nursing. After completing her PhD at USD in 2018, she joined the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF, as a symptom science postdoctorate scholar, with her work focusing on the impact of skin-to-skin contact in preterm infants. She is also an alum of the California Preterm Birth Initiative Transdisciplinary Postdoctoral Fellowship at UCSF, which focuses on decreasing preterm birth rates in Black and Brown communities. Dr. Ford has recently joined the Oakwood University nursing team or nursing faculty as an associate professor in maternal child nursing. Dr. Ford, we're so happy to have you on our Oakwood University team, and we look forward to your presentation today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Good afternoon and welcome to the scientific community here at Oakwood University. It is certainly an honor to share my foundational research with you. I like to think we saved the best for last. So let us focus for the next 15 minutes on care, also known as kangaroo care. And I'm going to share my screen. Share screen. Share. And cancel. With this thing, it makes it harder. Hang on a second. Let's see. Okay, there's my slideshow right here. Can you see it?
No, we don't see it.
All right. So I need some help with this.
Perhaps
So
you can go on with your presentation or
share screen. Well, it doesn't make sense without the PowerPoint presentation. Here we are, share. All right, here we are. So oxidative stress biomarker decreased in preterm neonates treated with skin-to-skin care. Or symptom science lab at the University of California in San Francisco was focused on our work at Loma Linda, where we focused on stress as a symptom of parent-infant separation. We know that infants belong with their mothers and that there are provisions embedded in the mother's body that can give us the expression of well-adapted caregiving for maturation of neurobiological systems that sustain stabilization and participation in the social world. Can you see it? Can you see the PowerPoint, everyone? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see it and we can hear you.
Oh, very good. Okay. And so we would not think to leave our infant under a tree somewhere, because what would happen to the baby? Yet this is the very thing we do when we leave our babies in the neonatal intensive care unit. Separation of mothers and infants post-birth began in the early 1900s with the use of general anesthesia, which rendered both the infant and the mother incapable of interactions for the first 24 to 48 hours. When a baby is born prematurely here in the US, in our Western care, mothers and babies are separated for specialized care in the neonatal intensive care unit, and this is still our standard of care. Research has shown that infants in the NICU experience an average of 10 to 14 painful procedures per day. There's accumulating evidence that chronic stress from repeated painful experiences in life result in structural and functional changes in the brain, as well as reprogramming of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, all of which contribute to lifelong neurodevelopmental and behavioral changes. Skin-to-skin contact is an intervention commonly used in the NICU, where the infant is held by a parent or a primary caregiver chosen by the parent with direct skin-on-skin contact. So the infant just has the diaper on and mom has removed her bra, and so it's skin-to-skin all the way down. Has any of you experienced this kind of care with your babies? I am sure you have. In nursing, nurse researchers chose a framework. They choose a framework or a conceptual model that underpins the concepts in their study. And I chose Linda Mefford's theory. It's a middle range theory of health promotion. And it just brings to life the concepts of conception to term birth, preterm birth interrupting, and thrusting the infant into an extrauterine environment where in the NICU, where the infant is physiologically immature, structurally immature, neurologically immature. And this is a big disruption in the family system. But nursing has to adapt to that to bring this baby back to health and to bring the family back to a stable position. So our objectives were to link the physiological benefits of skin-to-skin contact to biochemical markers and some physiological markers to provide empirical evidence by examining the association on energy, utilization, and stress as evidenced by reduced biochemical markers of ATP degradation. For example, hypoxanthine, xanthine, uric acid, and allantoin, which a measure of oxidative stress. So you might be wondering, how does this help? How can you tell that this is going to be happening with babies? As we examine the stress pathway between the preterm morbidities, which are in baby blue, and the biochemical markers, which are in green, you see that all these use up ATP, uses up energy. And so when we have a lowering of ATP, we have increased adenosine and inosine, which leads to hypoxanthine, xanthine, and uric acid. And these substances, or these purines, in the presence of free radical and reactive oxygen species production, produces allantoin. And this really is what we are interested in at the moment. And then here's the pathway again. I'm not going to go through it. This is the chemical compound for allantoin. And so my research question is there a relationship between skin-to-skin contact and physiological and biochemical markers of ATP degradation on oxidative stress? We hypothesize that preterm infants who receive skin-to-skin contact will have a significant decrease in those urinary ATP markers compared to babies in the isolates. So we did a sample size calculation using a repeated measures ANOVA approach, and we calculated power to detect differences in purine levels. So our sample size was based on the following assumptions. We had a significance level of 0.05, a beta of 0.20, two-tailed statistical tests, power calculated at 80%, and an effect size of 0.35, with a minimum sample size of 50. So to test these hypotheses, we wanted a very strong design, and so we used a stratified prospective randomized clinical trial. We were going to have premature mother-infant diets, and they were going to be 24 to 36 weeks. So how do we do that? How do we keep babies from getting skin-to-skin contact as researchers when we know this is good? So what we did, I had to have two groups for the randomized controlled trial, the intervention group and the control group. So the first group you see on the top here, early skin-to-skin, 25, we were gonna give them skin-to-skin on, and you see the DOL, it means day of life, 1, 2, day of life 3, we were gonna start. And we were going to collect urine before skin-to-skin and after skin-to-skin on day 3. And then on day 4, we were going to do the same thing after 1 hour of skin-to-skin contact with their mother on each of those days. And the delayed skin-to-skin contact people, the control group, they were going to have standard care in the isolate on day 3, 1 hour of quiet care. I collected urine before and after. And then on day 4, they were going to have skin-to-skin contact 1 hour with their moms. And so the MIBS down here is a mother-infant bonding scale, which is an 8-item self-assessment that the mothers completed. What did I want to collect? Well, I wanted to collect urine. And the urine for hypoxanthine, xanthine, and uric acid was going to be run by high-performance liquid chromatography. And the urine for allantoin was going to be run or processed with gas chromatography mass spectrometry. We did vital signs. We did regional and systemic oxygenation using near-infrared spectroscopy. And we looked at the demographic data from the electronic record. Who should we include and who should we exclude? Well, we wanted premature babies that were 24 to 36 weeks and that had a very stable score, SNAP-2 score, which is a mortality risk score of less than 9. And we didn't want these babies where ATP would have been affected by their surgery or cyanotic heart disease or any of those anomalies that was going to use up their energy. The study was conducted at a level 4 neonatal intensive care unit in Southern California, and IRB approval from the University of San Diego and Loma Linda University. So how did we analyze our data? We used a mixed model ANOVA, and the significance was set at 0.05. Descriptive analysis of all ratio level, mean with standard deviation if it was normal, and median and range when there were outliers. Categorical variables were presented with number and percentage. And then our independent samples t-test when parametric assumptions were met, and Mann-Whitney U-test when the extreme outliers were present. Chi-square was used to test categorical variables between the groups. And when the assumptions of chi-square was not met, Fisher's exact test was used. So let's quickly look at our consort diagram here. We had 61 eligible mothers and preterm infants, but 5 refused to consent, and then 5 failed eligibility, and we were left with 51. 26 was randomized to the skin-to-skin contact group, and then further stratified in terms of their weight, less than 1,000 grams and higher than 1,001 to 2,000 grams. And so we did that also for the standard care using block randomization. And again, they were stratified. And so we analyzed 26 in the KMC group, and which is the intervention group, and analyzed 25 in the standard care group. So let's quickly look at these characteristics of mothers. You see 2 groups there, Kangaroo Care and the control group, and everything was very similar except for ethnicity. We had 15 whites in the Kangaroo group, in the Kangaroo Care group, and higher Blacks, Hispanic, and others in the control group. And if you look at the population characteristics of the neonate, the only difference there is gender. We ended up, even though we randomized, we ended up having 16 females in the Kangaroo group and 16 male in the control group. So let's quickly look at our first biomarker that we measured. This is, if you see the red dot with the red dotted lines, those are the intervention group, the Kangaroo group, I call them. And then the blue dotted line and dots are the control group, the ones that had standard care the first day. And then if you see the time points, it's before and after the intervention, whatever the intervention was. So in this one, you can see that Both intervention and control groups showed no statistically significant difference between the two groups and over time. And if you look to the right of the bottom of the slide, you will see the p-values. Xanthine is another measure of catabolic metabolism, and there was no statistical difference between the two groups, but there was statistical significance over time with a p-value of 0.042. If we look at uric acid, it showed similar mean scores with decreasing scores for both groups. There was no statistically significant difference between the two groups, but there's a statistical significant correlation over time with a p-value of p equals 0.025. Allantoin, which is our oxidative stress marker, mean scores were statistically significantly lower in the intervention group than in the control group, with a p-value of 0.026. However, there was no statistically significant difference over time. So, in our discussion, our findings support the hypothesis that skin-to-skin contact may in fact conserve energy and lower stress in preterm infants, and that allantoin could be the first biomarker of oxidative stress, signaling a reduction in inflammatory processes in the presence of skin-to-skin contact. We know there is some kind of relationship between skin-to-skin contact between xanthine and uric acid, with those scores over time, the significance over time. And we know that the marker of oxidative stress was found to be lower in infants that receive skin-to-skin. So these scores can be compared to those studies published on skin-to-skin contact decreasing stress and lowering cortisol levels in preterm infants. Strengths, it was a randomized controlled trial with stratification and longitudinal study. And to our knowledge, this is the first longitudinal study to link biochemical markers to physiological variables in applying skin-to-skin contact intervention versus incubator care. Weakness, you saw the weakness in the stratification of the randomization because I had a very low amount of babies in the less than 1,000 gram, and I had a higher amount of babies in the above 1,001 to 2,000 grams. And the gestational age was very broad. You know, it was come one, come all, but we probably would have learned more from a younger gestational age group or a closer knit together gestational age group. And time constraints of a dissertation study did not allow ample time to see significant differences over time. But we replicated the study in my postdoctoral work over a longer period of time. And so in conclusion, this study will supply the biochemical data to further support the benefits of energy conservation from skin-to-skin contact. And we hope that this supply further incentive for neonatal intensive care nurses and providers to adopt skin-to-skin as the primary modality for caring for preemies. And as Dr. James said, I did receive a dissertation award of $5,000 for this dissertation. And here is the published study in the Biological Research for Nursing, and all the references are there. And I will now entertain your questions.
Was a fascinating study. Oh my goodness. Very impressive. Very impressive. I'm curious to know, what future studies do you have in mind, or are
And so the future studies that I have done, we haven't written it up yet, but we did it at the University of California, San Francisco. So I studied those biomarkers and I added cortisol and oxytocin in the study. And so I did it over 3 days so that we would have a longer time to look at it. And so I have that study in the process of writing it up. I have all the results. We just got to write it up and do statistical analyses.
Yes. Wow, like I said, very impressive. I can certainly see how this is very, very helpful. And I look forward to seeing more of your research in the future.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to doing lots more.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Ford. We really enjoyed that.
You're very welcome.
Yes, that was so awesome. And I just want to say, these research studies, they're phenomenal. They're very practical, and it really does impact society. And I want to say thank you to everyone that presented today on day 1 of our research symposium. And I just want to remind you that tomorrow is day 2, and we have another round of phenomenal oral presentations as well as poster presentations. And I hope that we will see you there. And we have keynote speaker, Dr. Marisol Norris, who will be presenting. Dr. Prudence is unable to be here with me, but she wanted to extend her gratitude and amazement of the presentations that were done today. And I would like to thank the Faculty Research Planning Committee for their assistance in this. So what we will do is just close out this session with prayer, and then we will see you all tomorrow. So let's bow your heads. Dear Lord, thank you once again for all that you've done, for these amazing presentations and knowledge that has been brought out to us. And I pray that you may be with those that are going to present tomorrow. Please help them to gather all the information that is needed to present their findings, that people may understand them and be able to learn material that they can apply to their lives, just as we did today. Thank you once again for your blessings. We love you and we praise you. Amen.